You're not important anymore. Those were the words my daughter whispered to me on my 71st birthday, while my family laughed in the next room pretending everything was perfect. For hours later, I was sitting in my attorney's office changing every beneficiary tied to my name before midnight. My name is Margaret Collins, and until that night, I truly believed love could survive disrespect if a mother just kept forgiving enough. I was wrong. The party had started at 6 o'clock sharp in Rebecca's beautiful colonial house outside Baltimore. The kind of house with white stone columns, designer lanterns by the front door, and furniture so expensive you become afraid to sit down. My daughter loved appearances. Everything had to look polished. Perfect wine glasses. Perfect catered food. Perfect family photos framed along the hallway like we belonged in a magazine spread. Rebecca greeted guests wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress and diamond earrings her husband Ethan bought her last Christmas. She looked stunning, confident, successful, the kind of woman people admire instantly. And for most of the evening, she played the role of loving daughter beautifully. Mom, sit here. Mom, let me refill your wine. Mom, everyone's asking about your lemon pie recipe. Anyone watching would have thought I was lucky. Maybe that was the cruelest part. The performance. Around 8:30, after dinner plates had been cleared and the birthday cake was waiting in the kitchen, I handed Rebecca a small velvet box. Inside was a silver charm bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother. For generations of women in our family had worn it. My mother wore it on holidays. I wore it the day Rebecca graduated from Georgetown Law. I still remembered fastening it around her wrist while crying in the parking lot because I'd worked double shifts for years just to help pay that tuition. It's beautiful, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then she kissed my cheek while guests smiled at us from across the dining room. But 20 minutes later, I walked into the kitchen and saw the bracelet sitting abandoned beside the sink next to a half-empty wine glass. Rebecca was standing near the pantry scrolling through her phone while Ethan spoke quietly to another couple by the back door. Honey, I said gently, holding up the bracelet, you forgot this. She looked at it for barely a second before exhaling impatiently. Mom, can we not do this tonight? I froze. Do what? She stepped closer, lowering her voice so no one else could hear. You keep acting like this family still revolves around you. I felt something tighten in my chest. Rebecca, she crossed her arms. You need to understand something. You're not important anymore. For a moment, the kitchen noise disappeared completely. The laughter in the dining room sounded far away. I stared at my daughter's face, trying to find the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. But all I saw was irritation. Embarrassment. Like my presence had become inconvenient to her carefully curated life. I don't mean that in a cruel way, she continued softly, almost rehearsed. It's just reality. Ethan and I have our own family now. Our own future. You can't expect to stay at the center of everything forever. I looked down at the bracelet in my hand. The silver charms trembled slightly against my fingers. I see, I whispered. Rebecca checked toward the dining room before speaking again. Please don't make tonight emotional. Everyone's finally having a good time. Then she walked away smiling before anyone could suspect a thing. I stood alone in that kitchen for almost a full minute staring at the bracelet while the dishwasher hummed beside me. And somewhere deep inside me, something finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a lock clicking shut. At 11:47 that night, I signed papers removing my daughter from every beneficiary document connected to my name. The next morning, my daughter called me at exactly 9:14. Her voice sounded cheerful, effortless, like the night before had never happened. Morning, Mom. Did you make it home okay? I stood in my kitchen staring at the coffee maker while rain slid slowly down the window above the sink. For a second, I almost convinced myself I had imagined everything. Maybe I misunderstood her. Maybe. 71-year-old women hear pain more sharply because they expect it. I got home fine, I said quietly. Good. I just wanted to check on you. You seemed tired last night. Tired. That was the word she chose. Not hurt. Not upset. Tired. I suppose I was, I answered. Rebecca hesitated before lowering her voice slightly. And Mom? About last night. I think maybe you took some things too personally. I closed my eyes. There it was. The rewriting of reality. The careful smoothing over. I had spent most of my adult life watching people do that to women my age. Say something cruel, then call us emotional when we bleed from it. I understand perfectly, I told her. Silence settled between us for 2 full seconds. Then she laughed lightly. Okay then. Well, Ethan and I are heading to Annapolis this weekend with friends. I will call you Sunday. She never asked if I wanted to come. She used to. Years ago, she used to ask me everywhere. Farmers markets. Christmas festivals. Harbor dinners downtown. Back when my presence still made her feel safe instead of burdened. After the call ended, I carried my coffee into the living room and looked around the townhouse I had lived in for almost 23 years. Every corner of that place held evidence of sacrifice. The piano Rebecca begged for when she was 11, even though I could barely afford groceries that winter. The framed law degree hanging beside the fireplace because she once said none of it would have happened without me. The cream-colored recliner where I spent nights sewing extra alterations for neighbors after my hospital shifts just to help cover her tuition payments. Mothers build entire worlds out of exhaustion. The dangerous part is we expect those worlds to be remembered. Around noon, my attorney Daniel Mercer called to confirm the paperwork from the night before had already been filed. Everything is official now, he said carefully. Retirement accounts, trust distributions, life insurance, all updated. I sat quietly at the dining table tracing my finger along a scratch in the wood left by Rebecca's science project back in middle school. Did I do the right thing? I asked softly. Daniel did not answer. Immediately. He had known me almost 15 years. He handled my late husband's estate after Richard died from a stroke at 58. He knew how rarely I put myself first. Margaret, he finally said, people do not usually make decisions like this after one bad conversation. His words settled heavily in the room because he was right. This was not about one sentence in a kitchen. It was about 10 years of small humiliations accumulating quietly like dust no one bothers to clean. Forgotten invitations. Delayed callbacks. Holiday dinners where Ethan discussed business deals while speaking to me like a confused neighbor. Rebecca correcting my clothes before parties. Rebecca joking about my age in front of her friends. Rebecca saying things like, "Mom, you are too sensitive," every time I reacted like a human being instead of furniture. The birthday conversation had simply stripped the final layer away. By Thursday afternoon, I received a notification from my bank confirming the beneficiary updates had processed completely. I stared at the message for a long time before setting my phone down. Somewhere across Maryland, my daughter still believed she understood exactly how the rest of my life would unfold. She believed one day this house would become hers. The accounts. The jewelry. The investments Richard and I spent 40 years building one careful dollar at a time. She thought the future was already secured. What she did not know was that the future had changed at 11:47 on a rainy Tuesday night while she slept peacefully beside her husband. When people hear stories like mine, they usually assume the distance between a mother and daughter happens suddenly. Like one terrible argument shattered everything overnight. But relationships rarely break that way. Most of the time, they erode quietly. Slowly. One disappointment at a time until eventually you wake up and realize you are no longer loved in the same language you spent your whole life speaking. Rebecca was not always cold. That is the part people never understand. When she was little, she followed me everywhere. Grocery stores. Church on Sundays. Long walks around our neighborhood in Columbia after dinner. During summer evenings when the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and rain. She used to slip her hand into mine without thinking. Like it belonged there naturally. After Richard died, she became my entire reason for continuing forward. She was 14 years old when the hospital called me at 3:20 in the morning telling me my husband had suffered a massive stroke. I still remember driving there through empty streets praying out loud at every red light. Richard never came home again. One moment, I was a wife planning our anniversary trip to Maine. The next, I was a 43-year-old widow staring at funeral bills and a frightened teenage daughter pretending to be brave for my sake. I worked at St. Agnes Medical Center billing insurance claims during the day and waited tables 3 nights a week afterward. Some months I barely slept. I remember winters when the heat stayed low because I needed the money for Rebecca's debate competitions. I remember pretending I already ate dinner so she would not notice I skipped meals near the end of the month. There was one February when my transmission failed during a snowstorm on Interstate 95. I sat in that freezing car crying because Rebecca's college tuition payment was due the next morning and I did not know how I could possibly afford both. But somehow mothers figure it out. We always do. Rebecca graduated near the top of her class from Georgetown Law. I still have the photograph from that day sitting in a silver frame beside my bed. She is wearing her cap crooked because the wind kept blowing it sideways. I am standing next to her in a navy dress I bought off clearance racks after saving for 3 months. My face looked exhausted even then, but I remember feeling proud enough to survive on it. I could not have done any of this without my mother, Rebecca told people back then. She used to say it constantly. At graduation parties. At office dinners. Even during interviews when reporters from a local Baltimore business journal featured young attorneys in the city. Sometimes she would grab my hand in restaurants and say, everything good in my life started with her. I believed her every single time. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe mothers hear gratitude the same way thirsty people hear rain. We trust it too easily. The changes started after she met Ethan Walker at a charity gala downtown. Ethan was polished in the way expensive men often are. Perfect suits. Perfect teeth. Calm voice. He worked in corporate litigation for a powerful firm in Annapolis and carried himself like someone accustomed to winning rooms the moment he entered them. At first, I liked him. He brought flowers to my townhouse, asked questions about Richard, complimented my cooking. But over time, little things shifted. Rebecca stopped inviting me to dinners with their friends because she said the conversations would probably bore me. She began correcting the way I dressed before events. Mom, maybe skip the cardigan tonight. Mom, those shoes look dated. Mom, do not bring up politics around Ethan's clients. None of the comments sounded cruel individually. That was the genius of it. Each one was small enough to dismiss, small enough to forgive. But eventually tiny humiliations accumulate into something heavy enough to break your heart. Looking back now, I think my daughter did not stop loving me all at once. I think she slowly became embarrassed by the parts of me that reminded her where she came from. About 6 weeks after my birthday, Rebecca invited me to brunch at a waterfront restaurant in Annapolis. That alone should have surprised me. By then, most of our conversations happened through quick phone calls squeezed between her meetings or delayed text messages answered hours later with thumbs-up emojis and polite excuses. Still, when your child reaches out, you go. Mothers are conditioned that way. Hope becomes instinct after enough years. The restaurant overlooked the harbor, all polished wood floors and expensive candle holders even during daylight hours. Sailboats drifted across the water while servers carried plates of crab cakes and mimosas between tables filled with wealthy couples discussing vacation homes and private schools. Rebecca fit perfectly into that world now. Designer handbag resting beside her chair. Gold watch flashing every time she checked her phone. She hugged me when I arrived, but it felt careful somehow. Like she was completing an obligation she had rehearsed in advance. You look nice, Mom, she said as we sat down. That color works better on you than beige. I smiled politely even though I had spent 40 minutes deciding what to wear because I already knew she would evaluate it. Halfway through brunch, Ethan joined us after a meeting nearby. He slid smoothly into the booth beside Rebecca and loosened his tie while greeting me with one of those polished lawyer smiles that never fully reached the eyes. Margaret, good to see you. Then the conversation shifted almost immediately toward finances. Not directly at first. Ethan mentioned interest rates. Rebecca talked about housing prices rising again in Montgomery County. Then came discussions about long-term planning, retirement communities, estate taxes. I sat quietly stirring cream into my coffee while listening to my future being discussed like a business project. Honestly, Rebecca said while slicing into her salad, people wait too long to simplify things for their families. Ethan nodded. We see it constantly with clients. Elderly parents leave complicated estates behind, and the children spend years cleaning up legal messes. Elderly parents. I noticed the phrase immediately. Funny how quickly you become elderly when people start calculating your remaining usefulness. Rebecca leaned toward me with that same soft voice she always used right before saying something hurtful. Actually, Ethan and I wanted to talk to you about maybe streamlining some things while you are still healthy. I looked up slowly. What things? Nothing dramatic, she said quickly. Just practical planning. Maybe adding me to more accounts. Updating access documents. Making things easier later on. Later on. Another phrase that sounded harmless until you listened carefully enough. Ethan took a sip of sparkling water before speaking again. It protects families from confusion during emergencies. Especially at your stage in life. At your stage in life. I stared at him for a second longer than necessary. Then Rebecca laughed lightly and touched my arm. Mom, do not make that face. We are only trying to help. Help. That word again. People use it so often right before taking control away from you. I changed the subject after that, but something inside me stayed unsettled long after brunch ended. 3 days later, Rebecca stopped by my townhouse unexpectedly carrying folders from her office. I was already in the neighborhood, she explained while setting papers on my kitchen counter. I thought maybe we could start organizing some things together. She spoke casually, but I noticed how quickly her eyes moved around the house. The antique cabinet Richard restored before he died. My jewelry box near the fireplace. The frame stock certificates in the office. She looked at everything the way realtors inspect square footage. Mom, have you ever considered downsizing? She asked while opening one folder. This place is probably too much maintenance for one person now. One person now. I heard the hidden meaning immediately. Not widow. Not mother. Not Margaret. Just one aging person occupying valuable space. I manage perfectly fine, I replied calmly. Rebecca smiled, but there was impatience underneath it now. Of course you do. Nobody is saying otherwise. We just want to make sure everything is protected before things become complicated. Then she slid a stack of papers toward me and uncapped a pen. I did not sign the papers. Not that afternoon. Rebecca tried to hide her disappointment, but I saw it immediately in the way her jaw tightened before she smiled again. That is completely fine, she said while gathering the documents back into her leather folder. We can revisit it later. Revisit it later. As if my life had become a delayed business transaction waiting for approval. Before leaving, she kissed my cheek and reminded me to lock my doors at night because older people are easy targets now. I stood at the front window after she drove away and watched her Mercedes disappear down the street while something cold settled deeper inside my chest. 2 nights later, Rebecca and Ethan hosted a dinner party at their house for several friends from Ethan's law firm. I almost declined the invitation. Something in me was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Anymore. But guilt is a powerful leash for mothers. So I baked the lemon pie Rebecca used to love as a little girl and drove 40 minutes through evening traffic carrying it carefully on the passenger seat beside me. The house glowed with soft golden lights when I arrived. Expensive jazz music drifted through hidden speakers while catered trays covered the marble kitchen island. Everyone looked polished. Wealthy. Relaxed. Rebecca greeted me quickly before disappearing back toward the dining room where laughter erupted around Ethan's latest courtroom story. I placed the pie in the kitchen and quietly hung my coat near the staircase. That was when I heard Rebecca's voice from the hallway leading toward Ethan's office. She is becoming more stubborn lately, she whispered. I froze instantly. Ethan answered in a lower tone. Then you push harder. Eventually she will realize she cannot manage everything alone forever. My stomach tightened. I tried getting her to sign access forms this week, Rebecca said. She almost looked suspicious. Ethan gave a short laugh. Margaret trusts you too much to stay suspicious for long. Something about hearing my first name instead of Mom made my skin crawl. I moved closer before I could stop myself. The office door was cracked slightly open. Honestly, Rebecca continued, once the townhouse is sold and the accounts are consolidated, everything becomes easier. Ethan sounded calm. Practical. Exactly. Assisted living within 2 years would solve most of the complications. assisted living. The words hit me so hard, I actually grabbed the hallway table beside me to steady myself. Rebecca sighed heavily. I know that sounds harsh, but she is exhausting lately. Every conversation turns emotional. I cannot spend the next 10 years managing her feelings. Managing my feelings. I stood there staring at the family photographs hanging on the hallway wall while my own daughter discussed my future like an inconvenient scheduling problem. Then Ethan said something that changed everything. The important thing is getting legal authority before any cognitive decline starts. After that, judges get involved and it becomes messy. Rebecca lowered her voice further, but I still heard every word clearly. She will sign eventually. She always does when I pressure her emotionally enough. Silence filled the hallway around me. I remember staring at a framed vacation picture from years earlier. Rebecca sitting on Richard's shoulders at Ocean City smiling into the sun. She could not have been older than 9 in that photo. Back when hearing my voice still made her happy instead of irritated. Once everything transfers, Ethan continued calmly, we can finally stop worrying about future liquidity. Liquidity. They were discussing my life using legal and financial terminology while guests drank wine 20 feet away pretending we were one happy family. Rebecca laughed softly then. Honestly, sometimes I think she still believes this is all about love. I did not stay to hear the rest. I walked silently back to the kitchen, picked up my untouched pie dish, grabbed my coat, and left through the side door without saying goodbye to anyone. The November air outside felt sharp enough to cut glass. My hands trembled so badly while unlocking my car that I dropped my keys onto the driveway twice. But I was not crying anymore. That was the strange part. Somewhere between hearing the words assisted living and pressure her emotionally enough, something inside me finally stopped breaking and started hardening instead. The following Monday, I woke up before sunrise and sat alone in my kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum while darkness pressed against the windows. I had barely slept all weekend. Not because I was emotional anymore. That part had burned itself out. No, what kept me awake was clarity. Terrible, sharp clarity. The kind that arrives when you finally stop making excuses for people you love. At 7:30 in the morning, I called Daniel Mercer's office. I need another appointment, I told his assistant. Today, if possible. By 10:15, I was sitting across from Daniel in his downtown Baltimore office, while cold November rain streaked across the glass behind him. He studied my face carefully before speaking. Something happened. It was not a question. I nodded slowly. Then I told him everything. The dinner party. The hallway conversation. Assisted living. Legal authority. Pressure her emotionally enough. Daniel did not interrupt once. He simply leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together while the silence between us grew heavier with every sentence. When I finally finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes tiredly. Margaret, he said quietly, I think we need to take additional protective steps immediately. Protective. Strange how quickly that word changes meaning once you realize danger is sitting at your own family table. For the next 3 hours, we reviewed every document connected to my finances. Retirement accounts. Property records. Investment portfolios. Insurance policies. Medical directives. Daniel asked careful questions while making notes in yellow legal pads. Has Rebecca ever had direct access to your accounts? Only one joint emergency account, I admitted. I added her years ago after Richard died. Daniel's expression tightened slightly. We should review all activity connected to that account. By lunchtime, he had arranged for a forensic accountant named Linda Carver to examine the past 3 years of transactions. I almost felt guilty agreeing to it. That is the terrible thing about betrayal by family. Even while protecting yourself, part of you still worries about being unfair to them. Around 2 o'clock, Daniel drove with me to First Chesapeake Bank. I had banked there for nearly 30 years. The branch manager, a kind woman named Denise Holloway, greeted me warmly before escorting us into a private office. We are going to make several changes today, Daniel explained calmly. Denise nodded professionally while typing notes into her computer. One by one, protections were added. New authorization requirements. Updated passwords. Restricted transfer permissions. Revoked emergency access. I sat quietly signing forms while feeling strangely detached from my own life, as though I were watching another woman dismantle her family from a distance. But then Denise printed the recent account activity from the joint emergency account. And suddenly, the room no longer felt distant at all. There were withdrawals I did not recognize. Several $1,000s transferred electronically over the previous 14 months. Payments labeled consulting reimbursements, luxury furniture deposits, travel reservations. Rebecca had never mentioned any of it. Could these have been authorized? Denise asked gently. I stared at the pages in front of me while heat crept slowly into my face. Some of the transactions happened on days I was hospitalized with pneumonia the previous winter. Others occurred while Rebecca had been helping organize my paperwork. Daniel's voice became very still beside me. Margaret, did you knowingly approve these transfers? I swallowed hard. No, that single word seemed to change the atmosphere of the room instantly. Denise printed additional records while Daniel requested formal documentation for every transfer connected to Rebecca's access. My hands trembled slightly as I turned page after page. Not because of the money itself. Richard and I had done well over the years. We were comfortable. No, what shattered me was realizing my daughter had slowly been helping herself to pieces of my life while still kissing my cheek goodbye afterward. By the time I left the bank, the rain had stopped completely. Pale sunlight stretched across the parking lot while traffic moved steadily along the road nearby. Everything looked painfully ordinary. But inside my purse sat copies of financial records proving something I had spent months trying not to believe. Rebecca had not simply stopped valuing me. She had started viewing me as an asset. After the bank meeting, I stopped expecting honesty from my daughter. Oddly enough, that made everything easier. Painful, but easier. Once illusions disappear, patterns become impossible to ignore. Over the next several weeks, Rebecca became unusually attentive again. She called more often, dropped by with groceries I did not ask for, sent links to luxury retirement communities along the Chesapeake Bay with messages like, just something to think about for the future. The future. She spoke about it constantly now, like she was already arranging furniture inside it. One Sunday afternoon in December, she arrived carrying coffee and expensive pastries from a bakery downtown. Snow drifted lightly outside while Christmas music played softly from my living room radio. Rebecca walked through the townhouse slowly, studying everything with careful eyes while pretending not to. You still have that old dining table, she said casually, running her fingers across the wood Richard refinished himself years ago. Honestly, Ethan thinks antique farmhouse pieces are becoming valuable again. Valuable. There it was again. Every conversation somehow circled back to worth. Assets. Property. Future planning. Maybe, I replied quietly. She smiled before sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Ethan and I have been discussing renovations for our house next spring. I nodded politely while stirring tea. That sounds nice. Actually, she continued carefully, we were thinking long term. Eventually, when everything settles, we may knock down the back wall and build a larger kitchen. Especially if children happen. She laughed lightly after saying it, but her eyes stayed focused on me, measuring my reaction. Children would be wonderful, I said honestly. For a brief second, something softened in her face. The old Rebecca. The little girl who once slept beside me after thunderstorms because she hated lightning. But the softness vanished almost immediately. A bigger house would make more sense then, she continued. More entertaining space. Better resale value. Resale value. Somehow even motherhood sounded like real estate around her now. Before leaving that afternoon, she paused near the hallway where family photographs lined the wall. You know, she said casually, if you ever decided to move somewhere easier, Ethan and I could probably oversee selling this place for you. Houses in this neighborhood are worth a fortune now. I looked directly at her then. I am not planning to leave my home. Rebecca smiled patiently. Of course not right now. Right now. Another phrase designed to quietly erase your authority over your own future. 2 weeks later, just before Christmas, I attended a charity gala with Rebecca and Ethan at a hotel in downtown Baltimore. It was one of those glittering events filled with champagne glasses, silent auctions, and wealthy couples discussing ski vacations in Aspen while string quartets played near enormous Christmas trees. Rebecca looked elegant in a dark emerald gown while Ethan moved confidently between donors and attorneys shaking hands like a politician preparing for office. I stayed mostly quiet, observing, listening. At one point during the evening, I stepped outside the ballroom searching for a quieter place to sit. That was when I heard Rebecca laughing near the coat check area with two women from Ethan's firm. Honestly, one woman joked, "I hope my parents eventually simplify their estate planning. My mother still acts like she is going to live forever." Rebecca laughed softly. "Trust me, I have been trying to get ahead of that situation for months." The women laughed together. Then Rebecca added something that made my blood run cold. "Eventually all roads lead to me anyway. Not my daughter. Not my family. Me." I stood hidden around the corner gripping my evening bag while those words echoed through my chest like a closing door. Eventually all roads lead to me anyway. That was how she saw my life now. Not memories. Not sacrifice. Not love. Just eventual ownership waiting for paperwork to catch up. I returned to the ballroom a few minutes later smiling politely while Rebecca introduced me to donors as my mother Margaret. She kissed my cheek again before turning back toward her friends beneath the golden hotel lights. And suddenly I understood something clearly for the first time. Rebecca still believed she was winning. She had absolutely no idea the road she expected to inherit had already disappeared beneath her feet weeks ago. The call came on a gray Thursday morning in January while I was folding laundry in the guest room. Rebecca's voice sounded tight the second I answered. "Mom, did something happen with the bank?" I placed a sweater carefully onto the bed before responding. "Why do you ask?" Silence. Then a sharper inhale. "I tried accessing the emergency account this morning and apparently my authorization was removed." There it was. Not concern for me. Not confusion. Immediate concern over access. "Yes, I," said calmly. "I made some changes." "Without telling me?" Her voice rose slightly before softening again. "Mom, I thought we agreed I was helping manage things." Helping manage things. I almost smiled hearing the phrase now. I decided I no longer needed help. Another pause followed. I could practically hear her recalculating the conversation in real time. "Did Ethan say something that upset you?" she asked carefully. "Because if this is about paperwork or estate planning, you are misunderstanding our intentions." Intentions. Such a clean word for people with dirty motives. "I understand perfectly," I replied quietly. "Actually, I understand much more than you think." By that afternoon, Daniel Mercer received 2 calls from Ethan requesting clarification about unexpected financial restrictions. Daniel told me later Ethan sounded controlled, but irritated beneath the surface. Like a man discovering a contract had changed without his permission. 3 days later, Rebecca asked if we could meet in person. We agreed on Sunday at my townhouse. She arrived wearing a long camel coat and carrying a bakery box from my favorite coffee shop downtown. Again, the performance. Always the performance. "Mom," she began gently after we sat down, "I feel like there has been distance between us lately." Distance. I stared at her face while wondering how someone could speak so calmly after discussing assisted living and legal authority behind closed doors. "Maybe because there has been," I answered. Rebecca sighed dramatically before setting her coffee aside. "I do not understand why you suddenly stopped trusting us." Us. Another strategic word. Shared responsibility spreads blame thinner. "You and Ethan have been pressuring me for months," I said quietly. "About accounts. Property. Access." Rebecca's expression tightened immediately. "That was for your protection." "No," I replied. "It was for your convenience." The room fell silent. Outside, freezing rain tapped softly against the windows while the radiator hummed beside us. Rebecca crossed her arms slowly. "You are being unfair." "Am I?" I asked. "Because I remember hearing you discuss my cognitive decline at a dinner party. Before any doctor ever mentioned one concern about my health." Her face lost color instantly. Just slightly. "But enough." "You were listening to a private conversation?" she whispered. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Not guilt over the conversation itself. Only anger that I heard it. You said eventually all roads lead to you anyway, I continued softly. Rebecca looked away first. That was when I knew. Truly knew. Innocent people defend themselves immediately. Guilty people reorganize strategy. Mom, she said finally, you are twisting things emotionally. There it was again. Emotional. Dramatic. Sensitive. Every reaction became irrational once it threatened their plans. I stood slowly and walked toward the hallway table near the front door. Inside the drawer sat copies of the financial reports Linda Carver completed 2 weeks earlier. I placed the folder gently onto the coffee table between us. Rebecca stared at it without touching it. What is this? Records, I answered calmly. Transfers from the emergency account over the last 14 months. Her eyes moved quickly across the first page. Then the second. Then the third. The silence inside that living room felt enormous suddenly. Mom, do not, I interrupted quietly. Do not insult me by pretending you forgot. Rebecca's face hardened then in a way I had never seen before. The warmth disappeared completely. It was temporary, she said flatly. Ethan and I always intended to replace it. Replace it. Like that somehow erased taking it in the first place. I looked at my daughter sitting in my living room holding evidence of her own betrayal while winter rain darkened the windows behind her. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely no urge to protect her from consequences. Rebecca sat motionless on my couch for several seconds, holding the financial records while the rain continued tapping softly against the windows. I watched her carefully, waiting for remorse to appear somewhere on her face. But remorse never came. Calculation did. You are seriously blowing this out of proportion, she finally said quietly. Ethan and I were under pressure last year. We borrowed money temporarily. Families help each other. Families help each other. I almost repeated the sentence out loud because the irony felt unbearable. For 40 years, I had done exactly that. Helped family. I helped Rebecca through college. Through law school. Through her first apartment after graduation. Through her wedding. Through every setback and panic and emergency she ever faced. But somehow when help flowed in the other direction, it became inconvenience. Burden. Emotional management. You never asked me, I said calmly. We planned to tell you eventually. Eventually. Another delay. Another justification waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. Rebecca placed the folder down sharply onto the coffee table. I cannot believe you had people investigate me. I investigated missing money, I replied. You happen to be attached to it. Her eyes narrowed then. So what now? You punish me? Punish. Such an interesting word for accountability. I looked toward the family photographs lining the hallway wall before answering. No, Rebecca. I protect myself. She stood abruptly and grabbed her coat from the armchair. Ethan was right, she snapped. You have become paranoid lately. I remained seated. And Ethan was wrong about something else too. She turned toward me impatiently. What does that mean? I met her eyes steadily for the first time in months. You no longer have access to anything connected to my estate. Silence filled the room instantly. Real silence this time. Not awkwardness. Shock. What? She whispered. Every beneficiary was changed months ago, I said calmly. Every account. Every policy. Every distribution. The color drained slowly from her face. You're lying. No, I folded my hands quietly in my lap. I simply stopped mistaking guilt for love. Rebecca stared at me like she no longer recognized the woman sitting in front of her. Maybe she did not. Truthfully, neither did I. Because the old Margaret would have softened by now. The old Margaret would have apologized just to end the tension. But that woman disappeared the night her daughter told her she was no longer important. You gave everything away because of one misunderstanding? Rebecca asked, her voice rising. No, I answered softly. I changed everything because I finally understood. She laughed once then. A sharp, unbelieving sound. This is Ethan's fault to you, right? You think he manipulated me? I shook my head slowly. No, Rebecca. I think you made your own choices. That seemed to wound her more than anything else. Not blame. Responsibility. Tears finally appeared in her eyes then, but even those felt tangled with anger rather than sorrow. You are destroying this family, she whispered. I stood slowly and walked toward the front door before opening it gently. Cold January air slipped into the hallway. "No," I said quietly. "I stopped allowing this family to destroy me." Rebecca stared at me for another long moment before walking past me without another word. Her heels clicked sharply across the porch while freezing rain misted through the gray afternoon sky. I watched her drive away just like I had months earlier after my birthday party. But this time, I did not stand at the window feeling broken. I felt still, peacefully still. In the weeks that followed, Daniel finalized every remaining legal protection around my estate. The townhouse would eventually be sold after my death, with proceeds funding scholarships for single mothers returning to college in Maryland. Part of my retirement accounts went toward a women's shelter in Baltimore. The rest was left to my niece Caroline, who called simply to ask how I was doing instead of what I planned to leave behind. Rebecca sent several messages after that day. Some angry, some apologetic, some carefully worded somewhere in between. I did not answer immediately. Maybe one day I will. Maybe I will not. But for the first time in decades, my life no longer revolved around earning love through sacrifice. And strangely enough, that felt less like loneliness and more like freedom.